Hi everyone, welcome to this live drafting tutorial on how to draft not just one, but two 1930s influenced collars. And I'm going to attempt to do it all in 10 minutes, and afterwards I will answer any questions you have. I'm going to wait a few minutes for you to join me, and then I get started. And I can see a few people have turned up. Hello Sharon, I hope you're well. And while we're waiting, if you, some of you might know me. If you haven't watched my tutorials before, my name is Charlotta. I'm really passionate about pattern cutting and making your own clothes, which is why I started the School of Pattern Cutting. And I do tutorials on here on YouTube, and I'm also on Instagram, and I've got a website called learn.schoolofpattern.com, where I've got lots of courses and a membership on Patreon as well. But I do love showing you stuff on YouTube as well, which is why I'm going to show you two very quick collars today, which are really easy, but look very pretty. And hello Beth, lovely to have you on here. Oh, and I've got Anita as well. Hello Anita, I hope you're well. So some of you might have already seen I posted the images I'm going to look at earlier on here on Instagram, but if you haven't seen them, I'm going to show you in a second. Oh, and hello Janet, lovely to have you here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the tutorial first, because I'm aiming to do both of them in 10 minutes. So I will set myself a timer on my iPad, and I will try to do it just to show you that you can do it in 10 minutes too, because I think it's always nice to have a limit on your to know how long it will take you to draft. So I will talk you through it as I do it. And I will start with the sort of mock lapel collar and then do a geometric collar. Oh, and hello Yolanda, lovely to have you here. Hello to Madrid, which is even later in the evening. So, two collars I'm going to show you to draft today is this, both from the Durrells, because I did a live on Instagram with Lisa a while ago. So if you haven't watched it, we talked all about the different Durrells look and how to recreate them. And I'm going to show you how to draft this because it's such an easy collar, but by adding ribbons like we've done here or doing it as different color, it actually looks like it's a big statement for something that actually make your making even easier, because you use your collar and you just have a facing. So it's like a shawl collar without all the tricky bits. You know, when you do the corner on your shawl collar and it becomes really tricky, you're basically doing that without that. And then the second collar I'm going to show you in a second how to draft. It's not really a collar, it's a neckline. Is also from the Durrells. So I do like a double Durrells. And I was going to let you vote on which ones you want to do, but because we had all the Instagram outtakes this week, I didn't get to do it. So you're getting a bonus. So I'm going to show you how to do this as well, which is very easy. Again, it's just about how to add that sort of asymmetric button stand. Oh, so hello Kate, lovely to have you as well, and hello Eileen as well, lovely to see you again as well. So what I'm going to do is I've prepped everything out. I'm going to take you through it, and if you have any questions, if you type them out, and then I will answer them afterwards. Hopefully you're all clear. If anything isn't, just ask and I will talk about it afterwards. So I'm going to make the drafting full screen. Oh, hello, Lasandra. Lovely to have you here. There's lots of you today. It's lovely to see, and some I haven't seen on here before. I'm always very lucky when lots of you join me each week, but if you're new, you're welcome as well. So let's have a look at this. So for this collar, I'm going to try to make it really straight. Yes. If you watch any of my Patreon tutorials, this is what I spend about 5 minutes doing, just trying to get it all even so it looks nice. So let's get started. So you can see this color here. I'm going to lift it up so you can see that. So you can see this collar. It's like a shawl collar. So the first thing we're going to do is create our fold line. They put it on the top, but you can easily put it on a jacket or anything. If you're doing it on a jacket, you have to, of course, add your button stand first. If you're doing it on a dress, what they have done is they've extended the neckline past the end of the collar just to make it easier to stitch, because otherwise it's quite tricky to stitch to a triangle if you have all the layers meeting at the bottom. So I'm going to show you exactly how to draft this one, but of course you can adapt it as you want to do. And this is a great collar to add to any existing sewing pattern you have already. So if you have any sort of dress pattern and you think, oh, you know, I love this dress, but I want to change it slightly, I love this top, by adding a different details, this is a really good color to add. And before, if you want to add it to an existing sewing pattern, you just have to make sure you take the seam allowance off first. I will just copy your sewing pattern and trace it without seam allowance. You can leave the seam allowance in the armholes if you want to. The first thing you need to do is decide where you want the collar to start. So you can see this is my bust point. You can see her bust point is there. And interestingly enough, the actual slit goes all the way down to the bust point, which is quite low, I think. And then they've added some sort of modesty panel behind it. But of course, you can do it as high as you want to. And so I'm going to do mine a bit higher, just because I know you always end up adding something, because you can't wear it every day. And you can see on her shoulder, it hits it more or less on the high shoulder. But of course, you can make it wider as well, your neckline. So you don't need to redraw your neckline. You just need to mark on your shoulder how much what you want your neckline to be. And then you need to transfer that onto your back as well. So I'm going to make mine a little bit wider. And then if you did that, you would have to transfer that onto the back. So this is our fold line, which is the line, which is your actual, sorry, this is, the right is never great. This is the actual neckline, how it's going to look open. And then what we actually see is the facing, but the collar itself on the other side of that facing is just an extension of our bodice block. So what I like to do is, first of all, just draw on how I want it to lay. So they've got a right angle, which dictates the size of it if you want to have a right angle to a certain degree. Because if you want to have a right angle here, then it makes it, it tells you where it wants to go. But if you can see how it looks, it goes nearly all the way to the armhole, and it's sort of halfway down her arm. So what you could even do, if you have your trowel, you have a trowel of the thing you're making, if you go that you have already an existing garment, just with tape you can actually draw on your collar how it's going to look. So what we can do is we quickly outline our collar like that, and you can do something similar with a shawl collar, where you just outline. This is how, if I have my point there, this is going to give me this size. If I have a right angle, if I might make the angle, you know, you can sort of play around with it and how you want it to look like. And then you could even quickly think, oh, if I have ribbon like this, is it going to look like it looks on the image? But what you do once you've decided you like that point, all you do is you use your fold line as the center, and then you draw a line at 90 degrees to your fold line. You can draw a line with your pencil, or you can just use your ruler. And mine is, the point is 5 centimeters away from the fold line, so I'm transferring and mirroring it to the other side, and then I draw in my actual collar. So I've just noticed something. Can you see if I do that? Can you see it goes past my center front? If I draw it in. So I wouldn't actually be able to cut it out of one piece because that's my fold line. So what they probably had to do as well is that they started their actual turnover about, I think, about 2 centimeters, about an inch above. So if I do the same and then see how that goes. Ooh, that's nearly there. So you can see it's actually showing me that I can't quite make it. So what I actually have to do is the fabric. So if I extend if you're doing this on a jacket, you can do it wherever you want to be. But if you're doing it on a dress, you can still have it up here, but it will be just slightly further in. So you can use this as a starting point, but then if you want to have it on a fold, you can't move it past that fold point. So on the dress like that, it has to look either right to that point or right to this point. If you have a seam allowance, so if you have a button stand, for example, then you can have whatever color you want. But if you have a fold line, it has to stay at the point. So if I now cut it out, you can see my final collar can look like this, which would go all the way to the point, which I would probably do if I'm using a thin fabric, or if you're using a chunkier fabric, you can move slightly away and it will look like this. So you can see I had to make it a little bit smaller, and I wasn't thinking clearly, because that's what you always check first, if you can't go past your line. So but it's one of those things, in theory you know what you can do. In practice you sometimes forget. So this is super straightforward. Now we just need to quickly make our facing. So with a facing like that, we do it like a shawl collar. So we start out, I like to have mine about 5 centimeters on the shoulder point. And then what I would actually do, I would go down here, and I like to extend it sort of quite a lot, about at least 5 centimeters again, below the point where it finishes. And then you can just draw it in parallel. And then at the bottom, you start at the right angle again to the center front. And then you curve it up. And then put another layer of fabric of paper on top. And you can, if you're as lazy as me, you can just draw in your facing line. And then you can just cut it out. You can turn around if you want, so you can see clearly. And it's not just about laziness, it's actually, I had my seam allowance just to the bodice, and then I cut everything out at once. So I know the seam allowance is perfect, because if I trace it through and then add seam allowance, you easily make a mistake. And this way, I'm 100% sure that everything matches perfectly. So this is my facing. This is my fold line. And then what you do is you add the back facing to match, and then all you do is you stitch this all together, iron it, snip your corner as usual, and then you bear it. You can see your facing shows. So if you make a contrast color, it looks really nice. Or if you add ribbon, piping, whatever you want to, you can make a real statement. But you can see the basics are really straightforward. So that's the first color, and it took me 10 minutes exactly, because I basically made a mistake right at the beginning. If you do it at home, check. It just extend your center front line first, because it will tell you how wide you can make your collar. I just wasn't thinking. It's after 8 in the evening here. But it's you can learn from my mistake. And of course, if you have a button pen, or if you have a seam allowance. So that's the first one. And Sharon says, such a good tip for getting seam allowance the same. Yes, it took me years to learn that. I used to trace everything in and add seam allowance to each piece. But I think in a way, the least copying you do or tracing, the less mistakes you make. So by just always laying it on, you can trace through one line while it's pinned. And if you have any edges which are the same, you cut them all out at once. It saves you time, and it's actually more precise. So two birds with one stone, as I say. So that's the first collar. The second one is a neckline. But what I like about it, it's a really good technique to learn to add a nice finish to any neckline. So I'm going to show it to you in a second. Let's see if there's any questions. Kate, thank you so much. I'm glad you found it nice and simple, even with my mistake. If I do pre-recorded tutorials, I quite often, because you probably know from drafting yourself, quite often as you do things, you work out what you're doing wrong, and then you can correct it. If you're teaching it, that's really bad, because you want to show people how to do it properly. So I normally would edit that out to do it again. But in a way, this is better, because now you know what you could do wrong and why it might not work if you did it my way. So that's the first color all done. Let's have a look at the second one. So I'm going to move back to the full screen so I can show it to you all. And I'm going to try to do that in 10 minutes again. So tomorrow you might get a sewing pattern out, or something you already drafted, and you've got two options to add. So if you haven't seen the Durrells on Corfu, it's a really nice TV series. It's just the right mix of beautiful scenery. It's quite funny. Yes, it's really nice. So let's have a look at the square neck. So there's two versions of it. One is the proper way, which is how you do it if you pattern cut it, is that you actually do a new cutting line across the edge, so it'd be separate, and then your panel would be completely separate. You would interface it, and you have it two-layered. I mean, to finish the whole garment easier. What they have done is here the original garment actually finishes right on the edge, and then they have just added a sort of a panel which goes on top, and then the seam allowance is ironed over, and then it's just stitched on. And they've, with something like a square neckline like this, you can probably just use like a strip of fabric, which is then used like the edging of a blanket, so you have the mitered corners going round. I think they're called mitered. So it's like basically edging a blanket, only it's in real life. And I don't think that it looks like it's actually a real opening, but it doesn't look like it's got proper buttonholes. So you can do it either. So I think it might be the top button is real, or it might have something behind because you can't see the buttonholes. But you can draft whatever way. So let's first of all draw in the neckline. So you can see she's moved slightly away from the shoulder. Actually, not that much. So I'm gonna be really precise. And I'm gonna draw in one half, and then I'm gonna copy it to the other side, so I have exactly the same angles. So I've moved just 2 centimeters away from the neck. But again, on your own, if you have a trial of your bodice block, you can mark where you actually find it flattering for your neckline. So you could move away further, you could make it lower. And then again, you can see the original block would end up here. So they've probably gone about 5 centimeters down. And then the neckline is exactly horizontal at the front, so it's a right angle to your center front. And then you can see, because if you're drawing a geometric neckline, it's always you want to draw it like this, don't you? If you do that, I'm going to go back. If you want a collar which looks squarish like it does on her, if you draw it at right angle, it can look wrong. So what I will, again, you on your bodice block actually draw but it looks flattering, because if you're at right angles, it might actually look like this by the time it curves around your body. And it can go either way. So you can actually end up, if you want to complete something to look square on you, you might actually end up drawing a neckline like this. Or with something like hers is actually a really wide angle. So it's more flattering, but you rarely actually do a completely square neckline, because that area really curves. If you think, especially if you have a larger bust, it is really curving around your body in 2 directions. So the angles might not be the ones you expect. So it's always worth just using a tape, a color tape, whatever, and just, or pen, and drawing it out on you until you actually like it, rather than drawing it how you think it should be. And I used to draw squares. It doesn't work. So I think in her case, can you see, it actually looks like it hits the shoulder at a 90 degree. So I think this might be an angle like that, which looks pretty similar. I think it might even be slightly further away. Just if you look, this looks like mine is deeper and not as wide. So I think this might be even further away, but that's to a certain degree up to you as well. And then what you do is you fold your block on, or your paper on the center front. Make sure it's on the center front, otherwise it's definitely dodgy and wonky. And then you can just mark your 2 turning points, or you can use a tracing wheel if you prefer it. And then I can transfer it through. Here we go. It's not be too elegant. So you can see, I actually think now I've done it on the full scale. I think that looks wrong. That looks far too narrow. So I think we'll do this in different color. I think it actually needs to go up 1 centimeter, and I think it needs to go out 1 centimeter at least. But I think that's when you, if you'd laid it on you, rather than trying to guess it on a pattern, it'd be a lot faster. So I think something like that. Can you see that the proportions already look much better? So I'm going to go with the blue line. But of course, it's up to your taste as well. So that's the basic line, and that's symmetrical. Then the interesting thing happens where this becomes a button stand. So I'm first of all going to draw in the width of my panel, my facing. And I think you can go with 5 centimeters, or you could go with 4 centimeters on the original one. Again, it depends whether it's too heavy, what looks good on you. So I'm going to do mine in scale 4 centimeters. So all you do is you draw parallel lines to your original line. And because they have used just strips of fabric, you would then, you can add cutting lines here, and then here gets a bit more interesting. So here, the back of it probably extends like this and then goes down. And then the front, of course, is a proper right angle. You can see it's a right angle. So I think that extends all the way to where it hits the side of the panel, and then it goes down. In a second, we're going to take it all, trace it all through, and you can see how it actually looks like. And then we've added a panel which goes past the bust point. And this, can you see, this actually hasn't got bust dart. It's just got a dart down here. And of course, you would move your bust dart away as well once you actually stitch it. But I'm just drawing out how it's going to look, basically. And then I'm going to take it all apart with the layers. Another minute. And so you can see there's going to be 3 buttons like this. So it's a buff. You don't want your button on your button. So what we can now do is we're going to trace it all through. So what I'm going to do is, and of course for the back, you need to copy that. So with the back, you can actually either have the back as a just round, so you can have a panel, or if you want to follow that line, you would do it much higher, but your back could be exactly the same. You just transfer this point and this point. And if you have a shoulder dart, you can actually get rid of it if you make it a separate facing. If you do it the Durrell version, which is the quick fit one, then you just have to have your back dart. Let's do the Durrell version first, which is not the cheats version, but the easiest version. I'm going to pin it on again. And you always need 2 pins so your paper doesn't move. Use 1 pin, it will move, and then you won't be very happy. So I'm just going to, for now, just trace my left, but it's actually the left hand side of my neckline through. And then I'm also going to trace down. Okay, and I'm actually going to now be really naughty and trace this throughout as well. And then I can just cut my 3 layers through as well. And of course you could just do it to begin with. So I can now just about see all my lines. So I think if very probably, because this then becomes the back of your button stand if you have a working button stand. So let's cut it all out. Cutting out always takes the longest. It feels like it takes the longest. So of course you can do it step by step. I'm just being a bit fast. And also this is quite a straightforward geometric design. If you're making lots of curves and darts, it gets more complicated. So in the Durrell version, all we're actually done is cut this out of your fabric, and then they cut out a long strip of the white facing fabric, and then you would just create these corners like a blanket. So this would be a long strip, and then you just you stitch it like a blanket. So you have basically just strips of fabric, and then you just finish at the angle you need to meet, and then you stitch it together. So you would add your notches for each one to get it together. So you would have this layer on top, and then you would have it underneath. And then to get it working, that's why I think only the top one is, because that's when basically you make it fake up to here, and from this point it becomes separate. So from this point onwards, you then cut, draw your sealer ones first of all. So there you have your button placket, which is like if you ever done any garment where you have a placket which grows out of the seam. I think they literally, but this would have been done at home. So what you would do is up to there. I'm gonna cut no one of this out in a second. So up to here, it'd be fake and just top stitched. So you stitch it to your original neckline, turn it on top row and behind it, then iron over all your seam allowance, and then you top stitch it. But from this point onwards, you also make another one of just to be upright. Because I cut another one out. This is sort of where it gets slightly complicated if you do the Durrell version and you want to have it as a working placket. If you don't care about having a working placket, then it's a lot more straightforward. But if you want to have a working placket, it would then draw it like this. and then you sandwich your top in between your top panel and the other panel, and then again this one would go underneath and become your under panel. So it sort of gets layered up. So you start by working basically on top on your right hand side of your garment, but when it comes to being the placket, you go back to a normal construction. So I find that's actually, if you're just starting to make garments, that's quite complicated. Do you agree that this is quite mind-boggling, how you suddenly have to switch from basically layering it on top and just top stitching it to then it becoming a separate opening placket? So if that seems quite complicated to you, I'm now going to show you the easier version, I think. So this is quite good if you just have an existing garment, for example, and you just want to add this detail. You can use this. So on your garment, you would actually draw on your collar, and you could actually just then hand stitch it on, and you could top stitch it to this line. And once you top stitch it, you could actually cut out and draw on your placket this chalk or pen on the fabric. So you know how big it needs to be, and then you can add the other half. So you can do it this way around. What I actually would do is, and I'm going to do it without, I'm going to actually draw on the seam allowance for you so you can see. So we haven't got a seam allowance on the panel, but we've got a seam allowance on the top. So I would do the way I would do it is that I actually chop off my panel on the garment. It comes like this. And then you just cut out 2 out of these, always a pair, one in the fabric you want on the outside, one in lining fabric or in self fabric to nice finish, and you can interline it as well at the same time. And then all you do is you stitch your 2 lots of paneling along a neckline, along the outer edge, and the same here. You stitch this on the outer edge and you stitch it to your back panel as well, and then you iron it all over, and then you just sandwich your body in between the 2 layers and do normal seams. And then you can do the same, you can do a normal placket construction. So you stitch all along together, and then you just turn it over, snip into the point, and then you do the same on the other side, and you just turn it over, and then in the end you top stitch together. So I find it easier, but it's really up to you. It's whether you want to add it as a detail to an existing dress or whether you are starting afresh. And for the for the placket construction, if that sounds a bit complicated, if you search on YouTube for even how to construct a shirt, a cuff placket, it's the same construction. It's basically just maybe cutting either just a slit for a shirt cuff placket, or you cut out like a little sort of strip, and then you just construct your placket either side. And it looks scary, and I find it quite satisfying to get it right. Let's have a look at the questions. Okay. So glad you like the square neck, Eileen. And Jenna, I'm sorry to hear your colors are your nemesis. So, but you can watch it again. It'll be on YouTube forever. And yes, Lysandra, there's a perfect straight lines. I would always do it on myself first and then copy it, because you could see my proportions weren't quite right. And Kate, I'm glad you agree that it looks a bit tricky. I think it's one of those things that's quite hard to show in paper, but I think once you've cut it out, basically, you just lay it on, and then if you have any I always like to do if something, a method I haven't done before, or haven't done for a while, I look at the garment I already have and how that's constructed. And that normally tells you pretty much the order you have to do it to get it and how to stitch it and iron it, all that sort of stuff. Oh, and Anita, that's great to hear. And if you would give it a go, if you're doing it, I would love to see it. And Kate, yes, the second method sounds less bulky, I think. Okay, so this, I actually think the first method, so for example, in here, it's a linen dress, and then they would have just, for all the paneling, they would have just used cotton, like cotton lawn, or a linen, the same fabric, and they wouldn't have done any interfacing. So in this case, the first method, where you just lay it on top and then you just top stitch it, is actually probably less bulky. But the second method is good for, and also for the first method, you don't have 3 lots of seam allowance. For the second method, because we're making the panel separate, you've got 3 layers of fabric in your seam allowance. So the second layer is actually a bit bulky, but it's fantastic if you want it a bit bulky. So they've used a really nice linen, and if you ever had an old linen, they're quite often have a really nice, they're very airy, but they have really nice structure. But if you, for example, using a cotton lawn or fabric which is a bit too thin, you can actually use a separate panel to add a slightly stiffer panel which sits really nicely. Because if you just made this out of cotton lawn and you top stitch on top, it would be a bit flimsy. But if you actually make it separate, you interface it, you can make it stronger. So I think it's not that it can be made less bulky or more bulky, because alternatively, if you made this out of a wool for winter, then with the second method you could, because of course for the first method you would have your wool bodies and then you would have a wool panel on top, so you have 2 layers of wool. And with the second method, you could then face it in a really nice stiff cotton, so it's flatter. So it's both ways, basically, depending on how you want to do it. But yes, so these are the 2 drafting methods, and I think I got each of them done in 10 minutes. Today I was feeling very optimistic. I thought I can get both of them done in 10 minutes, but it just always takes a bit longer. And if you explain it as well and then work things out. But hopefully, like, I think even like 10 minutes for something which makes quite a big impact is not bad in drafting time. So I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. Have you got any more questions? If you don't, what this, I'm planning to make this at least a monthly occurrence. So I will start putting real drafting tutorials on YouTube once a month. And of course, there's also more drafting guides on Instagram and maybe some on here as well. So you get to learn loads more. And if you ever see something you'd like to draft me next, please just comment below and let me know what you'd like me to look at. Maybe not a corset or wedding dress, but something nice you see and you're not quite sure how to do it. I'd love to hear that. So if you haven't got any more questions, it was lovely to see you all. I hope you learned something, and if you make that collar, I'd really like to see it. So just tag me on Instagram. Oh, I've got a question of Sharon. On the top stitching method, to place it on, you cut the strips and turn under the edges, place on dress on top stitch. Yes, Sharon. So what you would, I'm cut it apart now. That's very good. I'm going to quickly make an example. So if that's your neckline, really bad, you have got seam allowance on here. And then you got your paneling to go around, which is just cut out of strips and stitched together. So it's just one long strip, which is then create a corner. And normally what you would do it, you put your right sides together, stitch it, and turn it round. What you do with this is you do it, now let me think. Okay, you do left side on the bodice, the wrong, sorry, I'm not even on here. And you do wrong side on the bodice, this the right side of the panel facing effect. And you stitch that together as normal, so normal seam allowance. Then you need to snip into all your corners, give it a really good iron, and you can even understitch it very closely maybe, but you don't really need to because we're top stitching anyway. And then what you do is you turn your, hope you can actually see this paper thing. You turn your facing on top, so it lays on top your paneling, and then you would turn the outer seam allowance under, Sharon, as you said, and you still have to make it quite precisely so that your corners are really nice. So fold it over and even trim it maybe, and then this lays on top, and then you top stitch it. So yes, the first seam is normal, but it's left, right, and right side together, so wrong and right side. And then the second seam is basically laid on top, ironed over and top stitch. So it's a bit, I think it'd be really clear when you make it. It's just, as long as you get the first one right, then it will automatically do what you want it to do. So I hope that makes sense. Yes, so you're very welcome, Yolanda. And yes, Janet, you can watch it a few times. I know but it's the same, and I like to reread stuff. I think watching once if it's something new can be quite confusing. And Sharon, I'm glad you got it. I think I didn't make it very clear, but yes, so it's basically like a normal seam allowance, and it's just what you do with it afterwards. But the nice thing is about this sort of method of adding a panel on top, you could just do it on your cuffs. You could do it as on a hem, on a skirt, on your top, and it's if it's a straight seam, it's actually sort of faster than adding a separate panel like I've done here. So if you have a separate panel, you have to cut it out once more. You have to sort of do more seams. Well, this method is just 2 layers, and you could just, if you have a dress already and you're half finished and you're thinking, oh, it's not quite that's what I thought, you can just add it afterwards. So it's really nice. And it's sort of typical that they would have done a really basic pattern, and then the finish is sort of easy to do, but quite high statement. So if there's no more questions, it was lovely to see you all. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You can give me a thumbs up if you do, and I will see you on here again probably in November at some point, but I will let you know a bit earlier this time. This week was a bit weird with everything getting posted, but you're very welcome. Thank you, very welcome, Anita, and lovely to see you all. Sharon, Janet, Yolanda, Eileen, Kate, I missed anybody, and Lasandra. Yes, it was lovely to see you all, and thank you so much for joining me. Bye bye.